Hello and welcome to Read Aloud with me, Dan. Today, we're reading Karl Marx's Wage, Labor, and Capital. I guess I'm not going to give you any context. We're just going to go right into it. I guess so. Here we go, Wage, Labor, and Capital. Before we begin, if you like my content, you know what to do. Feel free to support. I appreciate it very much. Preliminary. From various quarters, we've been reproached for neglecting to portray the economic conditions which form the material basis of the present struggle between classes and nations. Well, okay, I guess you're going to need a little bit of context here. When did he write this? 1847. We're talking about 178 years ago. 178 years ago, he wrote this. Why are we talking about this? Well, without a revolutionary consciousness, there can be no revolutionary movement. And, for the most part, there is no revolutionary consciousness. There's a severe lack of it in the minds of most, including some of the fundamentals, what we can consider the fundamentals of revolutionary thought. Wage, labor, and capital, and the historical context surrounding it. How did we get here? This is still relevant today, as in capitalism helps to form the foundation of social life as you know it. It's the primary thing. And we're going to get into it. Yeah, that's it. That's why. So let's do it. Again, I'm going to read it again. From various quarters, we've been reproached. Marx is saying they've been criticized for neglecting to portray the economic conditions which form the material basis of the present struggles between classes and nations. The present struggles, 1843. With set purpose, we have hitherto touched upon these conditions only when they forced themselves upon the surface of the political conflicts. He says, sure, we've only talked about it when we've had to. Guilty as charged. He says it was necessary, beyond everything else, to follow the development of the class struggle in the history of our own day, and to prove empirically, by the actual and daily newly created historical material, that with the subjugation of the working class, accomplished in the days of February and March 1848, the opponents of that class, the bourgeois republicans in France, and the bourgeois and peasant classes who were fighting feudal absolutism throughout the whole continent of Europe, were simultaneously conquered. That the victory of the moderate republic in France sounded at the same time the fall of the nations which had responded to the February Revolution with heroic wars of independence. And finally that, by the victory over the revolutionary working men, Europe fell back into its old double slavery, into the English-Russian slavery. I'll just chime in here. The French Revolution, 1848, February Revolution. A period of civil unrest led to the collapse of the July monarchy and the establishment of the French Second Republic. It was part of the wider revolutions of 1848 across Europe, driven by factors of like food shortages, economic depression, and desire for increased political, economic, and social rights. He says the June conflict in Paris, the fall of Vienna, the tragic comedy in Berlin of November 1848, the desperate efforts of Poland, Italy, and Hungary, the starvation of Ireland into submission. And he wrote a lot about Ireland. These were the chief events in which the European class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the working class was summed up, and from which we proved that every revolutionary uprising, however remote from the class struggle its object might appear, must of necessity fail until the revolutionary working class shall have conquered. That every social reform must remain a utopia until the proletarian revolution and the feudalistic counter-revolution have been pitted against each other in a worldwide war. Wow. Again, we proved that every revolutionary uprising must of necessity fail. He says every uprising, every revolution will fail until the revolutionary working class shall have conquered. That every social reform must remain a utopia. So he's very anti-utopian, despite the charge that communism is a so-called utopia. He's actually against utopian plans. He says social reforms are utopian until the proletarian revolution and the feudalistic counter-revolution have been pitted against each other in a worldwide war. So he says shit's going to pop off, and social reforms are, just utopian at best until we have these things that happen. And again, that revolutions, uprisings will fail until the working class, bands together and wins. But we're still in this stage here, in the heart of empire at least, where the working class doesn't have that consciousness. They don't even know yet that they need to get together. It's embarrassing. We have so much work to do. We're clearly in the beginning stages. Sure, there's a lot of hurdles for us, but I just don't see the work being done very much. And in some places, not at all. All right, so keeping on reading here, Marx says, in our presentation as in reality, Belgium and Switzerland were tragic-comic caricaturish genre pictures in the great historic tableau. The one, the model state of the bourgeois monarchy, Belgium, and the other, the model state of the bourgeois republic, Switzerland. Both of them states that flatter themselves to be as free from the class struggle as from the European Revolution. Reading on. But now, after our readers have seen the class struggle of the year 1848 develop into colossal political proportions, it is time to examine more closely the economic conditions themselves upon which is founded the existence of the capitalist class and its class rule, as well as the slavery of the workers. Marx says we have to engage in in a Marxist analysis. We have to engage in a materialist analysis. Marx is like, I'm going to do a Marxism. Okay? You guys, Marx never said that. I would die if he did. All right. Welcome in, comrade. He says, but now. Oh, I've already read that. He says, we shall present the subject in three great divisions: the relation of wage labor to capital, the slavery of the worker, the rule of the capitalist, the inevitable ruin of the middle class, petty bourgeois, and the so-called commons, peasants, under the present system. The commercial subjugation and exploitation of the bourgeois classes of the various European nations by the despot of the world market, England. The despot of the world market. 1848. That was England. You know who that is now. He says, we shall seek to portray this as simply and popularly as possible, and shall not presuppose a knowledge of even the most elementary notions of political economy. We wish to be understood by the workers. And moreover, there prevails in Germany the most remarkable ignorance and confusion of... I got lost. The most remarkable ignorance and confusion of ideas in regard to the simplest economic relations, from the patented defenders of existing conditions down to the socialist wonder workers and the unrecognized political geniuses, in which divided Germany is even richer than in duodecimo princelings. I don't know what the fuck that means. A duodecimo is a size of a book page that results from folding each printed sheet into 12 leaves or 24 pages. That's a duodecimo book. And a princeling, I guess. I guess he's talking shit about these political geniuses. I don't even know. That's a weird thing. All right, whatever. But he does say, we want to be understood. We want to be understood by the workers over here. So we're going to write this in a way that's understandable. In a way, he goes, we have to talk down to you guys. No offense, but we want to make sure that we're understood. So there we are. That was, what did he call it? The preliminary. That's what he called the preliminary. Next up, what are wages? How are they determined? What do you think, Chet? While you stare at this hyper-realistic photo of Marx? As you reach into your head for the place that holds the information about the word wages, what different kinds of things pop up? How do you define it? How are they determined? Generally. Is it all just made up? Or are there certain laws that help you determine how wages are determined. Let's talk about it. What are wages? How are they determined? If several workmen were to be asked, how much wages do you get? One would reply, I get 2 shillings a day, and so on. According to the different branches of industry in which they are employed, they would mention different sums of money that they receive from their respective employers for the completion of a certain task. For example, oh my God, here we go. For weaving a yard of linen. This motherfucker is obsessed with linen. Or for setting a page of type. He just keeps thinking about books. This motherfucker's thinking about books all the time. He's thinking about books and coats. He says, despite the variety of their statements, they would all agree upon one point, that wages are the amount of money which the capitalist pays for a certain period of work or for a certain amount of work. All right. That's the gist. Okay, so that's it. That's wages. Let's wrap it up, you guys. Good read. Thanks for being with me today. We could just call it a day right there. What's that? Oh, we have to read the rest. Okay. Consequently, Marx says, it appears that the capitalist buys their labor with money, and that for money they sell him their labor. But this is merely an illusion. What they actually sell to the capitalist for money is their labor power. This is what we give to them. Labor power. Motherfucker, that's my labor power. Get your hands off of it. Get your goddamn dirty hands off my labor power, sir. What you should say to your boss when you go into work today. Reading on. This labor power the capitalist buys for a day, a week, a month, etc. And after he has bought it, he uses it up by letting the worker labor during the stipulated time. With the same amount of money with which the capitalist has bought their labor power, for example, 2 shillings, he could have bought a certain amount of sugar or of any other commodity. You know what a commodity is? What's the Marxist definition of commodity? I would say off the top of my dome, I would say that it's something made to be sold. Is that about right? You tell me, chat. Pop off in the comments below. Marx says, here we go. The 2 shillings with which he bought 20 pounds of sugar is the price of the 20 pounds of sugar. Now don't get lost, just hang on, okay? Sometimes he says something and you're like, yeah? just hang on, okay? The 2 shillings with which he bought the 12 hours use of labor power is the price of 12 hours labor. Labor power, then, is a commodity, no more, no less so than is the sugar. The first is measured by the clock, the other by the scales. All right? You're selling your labor power. Their commodity, labor power, the workers exchange for the commodity of the capitalist, for money. And moreover, this exchange takes place at a certain ratio. Okay? Everyone's doing well so far? If you're here live in the chat, I want to encourage questions. If you're confused about something, someone else may be confused as well. That presents an opportunity to fill in the gaps. I've read this before. I'm familiar with this stuff. So I'm not trying to show off, but like, I'm just saying that I'm scared that I'm assuming that there are no gaps when there are, So please let me know if there are gaps in understanding what we're talking about here, please. Please, please, please. Sometimes I think he's being very straightforward, and I also know myself that sometimes you read something for the first time, you're like, what the fuck is he getting at? Okay. Again, their commodity. So the workers, the way he phrases this, he's like fucking Yoda, man. Can you rearrange this sentence in order? The workers work and sell, the workers sell their commodity, labor power, to the capitalist. The capitalist sells back to the workers their commodity. And in exchange for the labor power, the capitalist gives them money. Is he saying the workers exchange for the commodity of the cap? Is he saying that money is the commodity of the capitalist? Because that is sort of the case, but sort of not. But so I'm just wanting to understand what he's getting at here. Okay. So we're saying here, so much money for so long a use of labor power. So much money for so long a use of labor power. For 12 hours weaving, 2 shillings. 12 hours. In this hypothetical, he just asked people how much they made. And a guy who works the looms makes 2 shillings. And then you find out he works for 12 hours. Holy shit. 12 hours. I mean, there are still industries that are like that. But, I mean, just think about how many industries have benefited from so much organizing of labor power and the sacrifices made by previous generations. Now it's embarrassing to sit on top of this, I don't know, privilege and do nothing about it to help, further generations. It's embarrassing. A lot of you people are an embarrassment. Future generations will look back on you with shame. You did nothing. Man, Anyways, that's another discussion. Let's get back to the reading, please. Stay focused, Dan. Stay focused. So 2 shillings, 12 hours. He says, and these 2 shillings, do they not represent all the other commodities which I can buy for 2 shillings? Therefore, actually, the worker exchanged his commodity, labor power, for commodities of all kinds, and moreover, at a certain ratio. Yeah. By giving him 2 shillings, the capitalist has given him so much meat, so much clothing, so much wood, light, etc. That's in exchange for his day's work. The 2 shillings, therefore, express the relation in which labor power is exchanged for other commodities. The exchange value of labor power. Exchange value of labor power. The exchange value of a commodity, estimated in money, is called its price. The exchange value. Wages, therefore, are only a special name for the price of labor power and are usually called the price of labor. Wages, just a special name for the price of labor power. That's what it is. You got it? So, for those of you taking notes at home, wages. The price, a fancy name for the price of labor power. Of course, he uses the UK English spelling of labor, labor power. That's what wages. All right, we learned. That's what wages are. We did it. We learned something today. I don't need that. So wages, special name for the price of labor power, and are usually called the price of labor. It is the special name for the price of this peculiar commodity, which has no other repository than human flesh and blood. A little over the top there, Marx. No one's ever gotten hurt or died at work, right? Oh, shit. Let us take any worker. For example, a weaver. Oh, my God. Is he going to do this again? Oh, God. Is this a bit? I think he does this as a bit. Every time he does this, he's like, he starts cracking up. Oh, man. I love him. Oh, the weaver. Here we go. The capitalist. He's like, this is my favorite analogy. He just comes back to it. The capitalist supplies him, the weaver, with the loom and yarn. And you might think he's fucking sexist because he says him. I'm sure we can get past that, right, everybody? He says the weaver applies himself to work and the yarn is turned into cloth. The capitalist takes possession of the cloth and sells it for 20 shillings, for example. Now, are the wages of the weaver a share of the cloth, of the 20 shillings, of the product of the work? By no means. Long before the cloth is sold, perhaps long before it's fully woven, the weaver's received his wages. He says, he says, in other words, he says, hey, when a weaver works for 2 shillings an hour and makes a whole bunch of different clothes, and they sit on the shelf for a long time, maybe months later, maybe years, the thing sells. When the question is when the weaver got paid, did they get paid from that money from that sale? No, it didn't happen yet. It's not possible. A lot of times, right? So no. So their wages is something else. It's coming from another place. Keep that in mind, he says. This is fundamental. The way the way we exchange things sort of masks this reality, and especially the way that we talk about it. So he's trying to reframe the way we look at and talk about things. Where's the wage come from, he asks. Did it come from the sale, from the share of the cloth, of the 20 shillings of the product of the cloth? By no means, he says. Long before the cloth is sold, perhaps long before it's fully woven, the weaver's received his wages. He says, the capitalist then does not pay his wages out of the money which he will obtain from the cloth, because it's not possible. He says will, it's in the future. You can't do it by just, it's just how things work. You can't do something that hasn't happened. The capitalist then does not pay his wages out of the money which he will obtain from the cloth, but out of the money already on hand. That's just how it works. Just as little as loom and yarn are the product of the weaver to whom they are supplied by the employer. Why did you have to fucking say it like that? Just so little are the commodities which he receives in exchange for his commodity, labor power, his product. Oh my God. Can someone translate Marx into English, please? It's like just written in a way that it's just like, oh my God, why do you write it like this? It feels like every sentence needs to be rewritten in like an understandable way. He goes, we set out to make it as simple and understandable as possible. And then he talks like fucking Yoda. I love it. I can't get enough. Part of it's fun because like your brain is having to do all the mental gymnastics to figure out what he's getting at each sentence. Anyways, all right, let me try this again. Just as little as loom and yarn are the product of the weaver to whom they are supplied by the employer, just so little are the commodities which he receives in exchange for his commodity, labor power, his product. It is possible that the employer found no purchases at all for the cloth. It is possible he did not even get the amount of wages by its sale. It's possible that he sells it very profitably in proportion to the weaver's wages. But all that does not concern the weaver. With a part of his existing wealth, of his capital, the capitalist buys the labor power of the weaver in exactly the same manner as, with another part of his wealth, he has bought the raw material, the yarn, and the instrument of labor, the loom. So that's where the wages come from. comes from the capitalist's wealth. It doesn't come from sales. Marx says, after he has made these purchases, and among them belongs the labor power necessary to the production of the cloth he produces only with raw materials and instruments of labor belonging to him. For our good weaver, too, is one of the instruments of labor, and being in this respect on par with the loom, he has no more share in the product, the cloth, or in the price of the product than the loom itself has. That is just so fucking silly. I love that. I don't know why that made me laugh so much. He says wages therefore, he's just a silly guy, you know? He says wages therefore are not a share of the worker in the commodities produced by himself. You get that, right? Wages are that part of already existing commodities with which the capitalist buys a certain amount of productive labor power. Again, wages are that part of already existing commodities with which the capitalist buys a certain amount of productive labor power. Consequently, labor power is a commodity which its possessor, the wage worker, sells to the capitalist. Yeah, I think we get that. So why? Why does he sell it? Why doesn't he just go hang out with the boys and play Fortnite and drink beer? Why does the wage worker sell their labor power? Why isn't it that the capitalist sells their labor power to me? That never happens. You notice that? You notice how the capitalist never sells their labor power to us? Why is that? Why do we have to sell it to them? Should be the other way around. They don't even have a real job. So why does he sell it? Marx says it's in order to live. Well, I guess so. You gotta live. Okay. Well, I guess I have to sell my labor power. Marx says, but the putting of labor power into action, that is, id est, that is, the work, is the active suppression of the laborer's own life. And this life activity he sells to another person in order to secure the necessary means of life. Well, why doesn't he just not do that? Why doesn't he just fuck off and just go do his own thing? Well, that's the thing. The capitalist has made it so that it's darn near impossible. Unless you want to live outside of society, all society itself, because capitalism dominates the world pretty much. You're gonna have to do it. Sell your labor power to another human being who doesn't give a shit about you. You know, doesn't care about you at all. fact, they hate you. So the owning and ruling classes made it so that this is the case. We have to sell our labor power to them in order to live. And if you resist it, you will pay in one way or another. So, Marx says his life activity, therefore, is but a means of securing his own existence. He works that he may keep alive. He does not count the labor itself as part of his life. It is rather a sacrifice of his life. It is a commodity that he has auctioned off to another. The product of his activity, therefore, is not the aim of his activity. What he produces for himself is not the silk that he weaves, not the gold that he draws up the mining shaft, not the palace that he builds. What he produces for himself is wages. And the silk, the gold, and the palace are resolved for him into a certain quantity of necessaries of life, perhaps into a cotton jacket, into copper coins, and into a basement dwelling. And the laborer who works for 12 hours long, weaves, spins, bores, turns, builds, shovels, breaks stone, carries hods, and so on. Is this 12 hours weaving, spinning, boring, turning, building, shoveling, stone breaking regarded by him as a manifestation of life? As life? Quite the contrary. Life for him begins where this activity ceases. At the table, at the tavern, in bed. 12 hours work, on the other hand, has no meaning for him as weaving, spinning, boring, and so on, but only as earnings which enable him to sit down at a table, to take his seat in the tavern, and to lie down in a bed. If the silkworm's object in spinning were to prolong its existence as a caterpillar, it would be a perfect example of a wage worker. Poetic. Yeah, so he's saying your life as a wage worker is you just go to work, and that's meaningless. And generally speaking, a lot of jobs are. Most of them are. Um, and it's precisely because it's disconnected from the rest of your life. It's fundamentally disconnected. And he's getting at the main contradiction of capitalist society, the social nature of labor, and the private nature of profits, generally speaking, or surplus labor. Anyways, let's get to this. Labor power, he says. Labor power was not always a commodity, merchandise, something to be sold. He says labor was always wage labor. It was not always wage labor, that is free labor. He says the slave did not sell his labor power to the slave owner any more than the ox sells his labor to the farmer. The slave, together with his labor power, was sold to his owner once and for all. He is a commodity that can pass from the hand of one owner to that of another. He himself is a commodity, but his labor power is not his commodity. The serf sells only a portion of his labor power. It is not he who receives wages from the owner of the land. It is the owner of the land who receives a tribute from him. The serf belongs to the soil, and to the Lord of the soil he brings its fruit. The free laborer, on the other hand, sells his very self, and that by fractions. He auctions off 8, 10, 12, 15 hours of his life, one day like the next, to the highest bidder, to the owner of raw materials, tools, and the means of life, that is, to the capitalist. The laborer belongs neither to an owner nor to the soil, but 8, 10, 12, 15 hours of his daily life belong to whomsoever buys them. The worker leaves the capitalist, to whom he has sold himself, as often as he chooses, and the capitalist discharges him as often as he sees fit, as soon as he no longer gets any use or not the required use out of him. But the worker, whose only source of income is the sale of his labor power, cannot leave the whole class of buyers, that is, the capitalist class, until he gives up his own existence. He does not belong to this or that capitalist, but to the capitalist class, and it is for him to find his man, that is, to find a buyer in this capitalist class. Before entering more closely upon the relation of capital to wage labor, we shall present briefly the most general conditions which come into consideration in the determination of wages. Wages, as we have seen, are the price of a certain commodity, labor power. Wages, therefore, are determined by the same laws that determine the price of every other commodity. Question then is, how is the price of a commodity determined? Pretty simple. He says if you want to know how wages are determined, first you got to realize that it's a commodity, something being sold. And he also describes how people are forced into this position. They don't really have a choice. The question is then, how is the price of a commodity determined? So if you want to know how wages are determined, it's, again, realize it's a commodity. And then you got to find out how those prices are determined. And that's what he's going to get into in the next section. By what is the price of a commodity determined? And I think I'll take a break there for today. If you like my content, feel free to support. It really does mean a lot. Lots of different ways to do so. You can do so with a subscription or with biddies on Twitch. You can support on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. You get early access to edits, to uploads. And you can also support with a tip directly through Stream Elements with a link on screen, or with a link in the chat, or with a tip through Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. It's either iDanSimpson or iDanSimpson@gmail.com. Thank you so much for being with me. Thank you so much for reading. Check out part 2 of this reading next time. Love your face. Thank you.